The exhibition that's on view, Double Vision Art from Jesuit University Collections, is really a manifestation of the Haggerty Museum of Art's focus on advancing Jesuit thought, teaching, learning, contemplation through the visual arts. And the exhibition itself has been in the making for several years. It has a very interesting framing device, and that we took a look, and our curator, the curator of the exhibition is Lynn Schumo, our curator for academic engagement. Her co-curator is David Brinker, who's director of the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art at St. Louis University. And the impetus of this was really thinking about a couple of things. How can we collaborate with some of our other museum colleagues at Associate of Jesuit Colleges and University Museums? There are 28 of those universities. We all have obviously shared interests, and many of them have very interesting collections. In this case, we are collaborating with the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art at St. Louis University, also Loyola University Museum of Art in Chicago. So this is a partnership with 3 Jesuit universities, and the framing device of it is the Stations of the Cross. And as most of you probably know, that is a 14-step devotional that commemorates the suffering and death of Jesus Christ. And in this case, what we have done, the curatorial team, is kind of abstracted the ideas of each of those stations into a concept such as justice or courage. With each one of those concepts, there was a pair of works of art, and it's from all 3 collections that really kind of explore that idea in some way. And then there are labels written by faculty members from each university. So I share all of this with you, along with an invitation to come to see the exhibition at the Haggerty. It really is wonderful. And there's a wonderful publication with an essay by our speaker tonight. So we encourage you to come and enjoy that exhibition. Well, let me tell you about Father Tom Lucas. And what I will share is that we were so excited at the beginning of this process to realize, or rather when he said yes, I should say, to both writing the essay for the catalog and also speaking with us this evening. Father Tom Lucas, S.J., received his doctorate in theology and the arts at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He also holds degrees from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, Fordham University in New York, the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, and Santa Clara University in California. He's an internationally recognized expert in Jesuit art history, and he's well known as a liturgical designer and an artist with an international profile. As a graduate student, Lucas designed and directed the restoration of the 16th century rooms of St. Ignatius in Rome, and curated an exhibition on Jesuit architecture at the Vatican Library. In the course of that work, he also edited, contributed to, and designed the exhibition catalog Saint, Site, and Sacred Strategy, published by the Vatican City in 1990. His book, Landmarking, City, Church, and Jesuit Urban Strategy, published by Loyola Press in 1997, won an Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities National Book Award, and that was in 2000. He's also edited a Festschrift and is the author of 12 articles, so he's very accomplished, as you can see. After serving for 3 years as the National Secretary for Communications at the US Jesuit Conference in Washington, D.C., Lucas joined the faculty at the University of San Francisco in 1995. There, he was founding chair of the Fine and Performing Arts and founding director of the Thacher Gallery at that university at USF. That was in 1998. And the Kalmanovitz Sculpture Terrace, and that was in 2008. He curated more than 80 exhibitions on campus. He's also lectured at more than 20 universities in the United States, Europe, Mexico, and Asia. A tenured full professor, he was also named USF's first university professor in 2010, a very distinguished honor. Not to be outdone, in 2013, he was named Rector of the Jesuit Community at Seattle University, where he also served as University Distinguished Professor and Curator of the University Art Collection. And he began a new assignment in 2021, just this past year, as pastor of St. Ignatius Loyola Parish in Sacramento, California, where he continues his art and his teaching work. I'm so pleased to welcome this evening Father Tom Lucas. Thank you so much, Father Lucas.
Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome to you all. I apologize for not being able to be with you in person this evening, but with the travel difficulties these days and the dangers of all of that, it just seemed a more prudent thing to do. Let me pop over for a moment here to, technology. to the beginning of our program this evening. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was very, very intrigued when I first got the invitation to be part of this program by the good folks at the Haggerty Museum. Are you seeing me? By the way, I just want to make sure everything is sharing properly.
We're seeing you, but not your presentation.
Okay, let me try.
Yeah.
Ugh.
The share. It always works until you're in the moment, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Why is this not cooperating? Let me go out here and try again.
There it is.
All right. Now let's try.
Will be good.
Are we there now?
Yes, we're good.
Double vision. Beautiful. All right. I was particularly intrigued when I was invited to be part of this. The notion of reimagining stations, not in this case stations of the cross, but we might even call them stations of virtue, struck me as being particularly focused and an expressive way of looking into our tradition from quite a unique angle. The way it was described to me, I want to quote one line only. In place of the traditional passion narrative, 14 words expressive of the human condition are paired with 2 works of art as a means of providing multiple points of entry for exploring each theme. The sometimes surprising juxtapositions are intended to encourage imaginative, contemplative space for personal reflection. What especially touched me were those words when I saw that list: justice, courage, strength, and devotion, solidarity, mercy, perseverance, and discernment, wisdom, honesty, acceptance, sacrifice, compassion, and hope. Words that speak to our whole experience of what it means to be engaged with the gospel of Jesus. Let me stop sharing there. So this exhibit, as a collaborative work and a creative work among these 3 Jesuit University museums at Marquette, at St. Louis U, and at Loyola Chicago, points very clearly to me to an understanding and an appreciation of the centrality of the arts in general, and in particular the visual arts in our pedagogy, that goes back to the very beginnings of Jesuit education. The arts are, and always have been, more than a decorative ornament in our system. We see them as rather the vital connective tissue in our humanistic body of learning. And that's been the way it's been since the beginning. Some of our institutions of higher learning have museums or galleries that have become centers of instruction and dialogue. And even those that don't have dedicated facilities use the integrative power of the arts to enrich and enhance their curricula across the curricula. Art illustrates, it underpins culture, it challenges and informs engineers and scientists, as well as philosophers and theologians. Social scientists come to understand the world as it's evolving, and historians through art come to gain vital context through their exposure to the visual world, through music, through sculpture, through architecture. It shows how things were, art, and how things are, and how things perhaps could be. Unites mind and eye and heart. And indeed, I would go so far as to say that in the context of Jesuit education, the arts are a small s sacrament. That is to say, outward signs of an inner desire to communicate meaning across the disciplines, to promote values, and to recognize and to revere the deepest longings of our hearts, of our human hearts, for what is before us and what is indeed behind us and beyond us. Let me see if we can go back again. So to teach, to delight, and to move. As we welcome this exhibit made up of diverse works of art from collections of some of our finest Jesuit University collections, A word or two about the relationship between the Jesuit tradition and the visual arts might be helpful here. So a rich variety of works are on display, and some of you have experienced those already today. And the creativity of the university, of the curators, exhibit curators, gives a living witness to this intimate connection that exists between inspiration and imagination that's characterized our institutions ever since the late 16th century, and which ultimately, I would argue, comes from St. Ignatius himself. Preaching and teaching, inspiration, moving the imagination to aspirations towards the good, the beautiful, and the true, towards, to use Ignatius's own language, the greater glory of God and the good of souls. That's the hermeneutical key for understanding the importance of art and performance in our Jesuit tradition, and of the society's widespread use of art in general. In the early modern mindset of Ignatius and the first Jesuits, art never existed for art's sake. Art was always seen and understood as instrumental, as a powerful, nuanced tool for teaching, for preaching, and persuasion. Its primary purpose was to inspire. It was emphatically not about self-expression, but rather about expression of a shared faith and hope and history. And it was designed to and used to stir up great desires and aspirations, and indeed, in some cases, even heroism. So where does that inclination come from? Well, it comes from Ignatius. Most people think of Ignatius as a dour, unapproachable mystic. But before he had his conversion experience, he was a man of his place and time. A man who before that experience was a gentilhombre, a hidalgo who loved music and prided himself on his dancing skills, a courtier. To the end of his life, in fact, Ignatius adored great music, and he lavished the meager funds that he was able to raise on beautifying the Jesuits' first churches in Rome and around Italy and across Europe. At the same time, he legislated that Jesuits shouldn't be bound to sing the monastic office together, not because he didn't like music, but rather because he wanted the men of his company to be free, not to be tethered to a single place or to an inflexible routine. The society's embrace of the arts came out of a profound trust that Ignatius placed in the imagination, one that grew as he matured, a discerning trust that he learned through long reflection and suffering after his near-death experience in a battle, a meaningless battle, 500 years ago in 1521. And he went on to translate that experience and that trust into a methodology that's at the heart of his spiritual exercises. During a long and agonizing recuperation, Ignatius only had two books to distract him: The Lives of the Saints and The Life of Christ by Ludolf of Saxony. From Ludolf, he learned the rudiments of a technique of immersing oneself imaginatively into the Gospels. And he took what he learned from Ludolf and developed it even further. Ludolf wrote, "Make present to yourself how Jesus spoke and went about with his disciples, with sinners, how he speaks and preaches, how he walks and rests and sleeps and wakes, performs miracles, and eats. Write down in your heart his demeanor and his actions." Ignatius himself developed over a long time this devotio moderna technique in his exercises, teaching retreatants how to pray with their imaginations and their hearts as well as with their minds. And especially as they contemplated the life of Jesus, to see, to feel, to experience vividly with the sight of one's imagination, and not simply to philosophize or to read dead words on a page. Ignatius made what I would argue is a spiritual and conceptual leap. Christianity, from the beginnings, has sometimes been suspicious of the imagination. Not too beautiful, not too sensual. Let's keep it in our heads and above our shoulders. But rather, Ignatius taught his followers that the imagination can actually be trusted if one is a discerning person. There's the rub. If one is a person who carefully knows how to read their own human experience, it can be trusted. Why? Because of the incarnation of Christ. Christ becomes flesh, Christ becomes visible, it becomes possible for us to see God in him. And so our imagination and our sight can become a valid locus for where God can reveal oneself, God's self, and inspire us. Through this incarnation of Christ, the enmeatment of Christ, we find ourselves opened up to the transcendent, but not through metaphysical moonshine, but through immanent sense-oriented means. And that implies images and image making. Hence, the arts become, for Ignatius, valid tools for evangelization. Ignatius says in the exercises that one begins reflecting on the life of Christ by making what he calls a composition of place. Composing a place, that, much in the same way that a composer composes music, out of what one has seen and heard or experienced, one prays with the imagination in rooms furnished with familiar chairs and tables, with landscapes that are embedded in our memory or experienced in images one's absorbed from art. One praying is encouraged to imaginatively enter the scene, to become not just a remote observer, but an active participant in Jesus' actions and conversations. Moreover, Ignatius insists that one return to the experience of prayer by applying the senses, as he says, tasting, touching, always drawing some profit from the experience. Given that imagination sometimes limps or flags, Ignatius and his followers even commissioned at great expense the very best Flemish engravers of his time to create a volume of illustrated gospel stories of 153 superb wood engravings that was first published in 1593, years after Ignatius's death. A book that we could consider to be a protographic novel. That book was reprinted over and over again. It went out in Jesuits' saddlebags to schools everywhere. It provided iconography for decorations of churches and classrooms. And in a very short period of time, it went around the world. As early as 1615 or so, 20 years after it was first published, it was recut into Chinese woodblock prints half the world away. The various aspects of art, of painting, of theater, of sculpture, of architecture, of liturgy, of instrumental and choral music, dazzling special effects even, all pointed beyond the individual to the shared tragicomedy of human life, already but not yet redeemed by Christ's intervention in human history. Paintings and sculptures open our eyes to the world as it was and is and it can be. Performances. This is a stage set from the early 1700s from Hungary, of all places. Performances can literally set a stage on which the meaning of our history can be worked out, can be explored. And explore it they did in college theaters and in theatrical churches, so that thousands of city dwellers could be exposed to the artful pedagogy that the Jesuits delivered in their classrooms. Anyone who's ever been to Rome and seen the Church of the Jesuit, or seen the churches of St. Ignatius in San Francisco or in New York, knows that there is a profound link between the Jesuit tradition and the art and the architecture of the Baroque period. In the 19th century, Protestant Germans who were developing the modern discipline of art history accused the Jesuits of creating the Baroque with its high drama, its charged emotional content, its exuberance and theatricality, as a counterbalance and even as a challenge to the cool rationality of the Renaissance, the Puritan simplicity of the Reformation, and the native northern piety of the Gothic. But recent historiography has taken a much more nuanced view of this coincidence. The Jesuits didn't invent the Baroque. They just used its dramatic and even propagandistic tools better than just about anyone else. And they used it with a vengeance, what we might call a rhetorical vengeance. In this late Renaissance humanists that they were, they used and adapted the revival of the Greco-Roman tradition of aurea eloquentia, the golden eloquence that was encapsulated in Cicero's triad docere, delectare, and movere, to teach, to delight, and to move. That's what rhetoric does. That triad sums up not just educational goals, but an attitude that pervades the whole of the Jesuit enterprise. And it certainly impacted the use of the arts and the design and decoration of their churches. Great buildings enclose space, and at the same time they disclose meaning, beginning with the mother church of the Gesù, the Chiesa del Gesù in Rome, and replicated in a dazzling array of variations around the world, all the way to Macau, the church of the college in Macau, St. Paul, on the right here. They opted for clarity, harmony, luminosity, and the big effect. A Baroque church was built within the walls of the Forbidden City in Beijing. The Church of the Society, La Compañía in Cusco, in the Inca capital, was deemed by many as the most beautiful church built in Latin America. Here, the Church of Mary Magdalene in far-off Manila, the famous Michaelskirche in downtown Munich, or the Bom Jesu where St. Francis Xavier is buried in Goa, or the Church of St. Nicholas in downtown, one of 3 Jesuit churches in downtown Prague. All of these buildings are spectacular stages and were filled with beautiful sight lines, with good acoustics, a place where the spirit can move easily between the experience of beauty and visual drama. Here, the University Church in downtown Vilnius, the Church of St. John. As time went on, as the Baroque matured, and as the Jesuits got more resources available to them, they employed the best architects and artists that they could afford at their time. Rubens on the left here, and Bernini on the right, just to name a couple. And they developed their own cadre of in-house Jesuit artists and architects as well. Drama is important, but the drama wasn't confined to theater or stage productions. Even church buildings became spectacles of sorts. Great facades like the Church of the Gesù, as we saw, or St. Paul's in Macau, created proscenia in the urban stage, and the drama continues inside. One dramatic innovation was the Teatro Sacro, the sacred theater. Jesuits promoted the pre-Lenten devotion of 40 hours exposition of the Blessed Sacrament as a way of counterbalancing the excesses of Mardi Gras all over Europe. They wanted to attract the faithful to godly activity instead. And so they had their artists, and sometimes their children or their students, design giant scenographic devices, much like modern opera sets, that would fill the whole of the apse of the church with light, and then they would fill the church with stereophonic, with multidimensional music as well, filling the apse and as tall as the nave. They became a kind of Baroque jumbotron. We need to look no farther than the same Church of the Gesù to St. Ignatius's tomb to see this taken out to the max. This is the tomb that Andrea Pozzo designed for the bones of St. Ignatius. St. Ignatius candidly would have hated this tomb. He was a very simple man. But if we look at this, we can see that it performs like a giant opera set. It's a place of grandeur, beautiful materials, of luscious color and detail. The statue of Ignatius over the altar originally was solid silver. Napoleon melted that down in the early 1800s, the early 1800s. The urn by Haggerty under the altar contains the bones of the saint. I have to share with you my favorite totally politically incorrect sculptures that were probably ever made. Here on the right of the tomb, as we look at it, is Pierre Legros' allegory of true religion triumphant over the heretics. Here you see true religion with the cross and the firebrand of the truth in her hand, waving the fire over two collapsing heretics. And a little angel is tearing the pages gleefully out of a book whose spine reads Martin Luther. Not particularly sensitive by our modern standards, but it speaks to the polemics of another age. Take, for example, the Church of San Ignacio, the college church of the Roman College. They were unable to get the money together and the permission from the neighbors to build a dome, so they get one of their best artists, probably the most famous painter of the Jesuit tradition, Andrea Pozzo, designed and painted a faux dome that's 18 meters across, so 13 meters, pardon me, so about 48 feet across. That works perfectly from the perspective spot in the middle of the floor and falls apart when you look at it from the altar side. Or take, for example, this glorious example, the Pozzo's fresco from the ceiling of the church, where he literally blows the ceiling of the church off. There is no ceiling. You're looking up into the height of heaven. The architecture of the building builds layer upon layer up into the height of heaven. And what do we see in the height of heaven? We see Jesus carrying his cross, and from Jesus' pierced side, a beam of light goes to the heart of Saint Ignatius. From Ignatius's heart, it refracts out to these four great allegorical figures on the four columns of the nave. Of Europe, a stern-looking lady riding on a silver horse. Asia riding on a camel. Africa, a black princess riding on the back of a crocodile. And most charmingly of all, America, a bare-breasted Indian princess who is clad in prescient red, white, and blue feathers and riding on a mountain lion. This is outrageously creative stuff. We would never get away with doing it today, but you have to admire the verve and the nerve that was involved in it. Here we see the mothership, the flagship of the Jesuit colleges, the Collegio Romano, founded by Ignatius himself. This building was built after his death. It had huge courtyards, a massive church that we've just seen. It had aulas, rooms that were able to be used for performances, and even an important observatory on the roof. The arts, and especially the performing arts, which were seen as a way of pulling together the various strands, from the very beginning were part of the educational program that the Jesuits began with their first college in Messina in 1546. By the time that the first kind of uniform code of educational procedures was published in Rome in 1586, the Ratio Studiorum, they had already decided that they would use theater and the arts in that. To speak in public with grace and fluency is training profitable for pulpit and bar. It develops that happy blending of assurance and modesty that constitutes the charm of well-bred young men. It helps you to get ahead in the world and to climb up the ladder of success. Those grand spectacles were rather incredible. Here, although there were no formal studio arts, taught in the Jesuit colleges. The students learned applied arts and mechanics, architecture and engineering, how to paint, how to sculpt, by creating gigantic stage sets that would sometimes fill the whole courtyard, and in some cases, the main plaza of town. This activity wasn't just fun and games, but rather the arts were integrated as an indispensable and a vital element in the educational and formative experience. Twice a year, major performances were written, produced, and directed that conjoined scenography and music and costumes and dance, punctuating the academic calendar in August and at carnival time for church and civic celebrations. Twice a year in more than 500 colleges over a period of almost 150 years. That means 100,000, maybe as many as 150,000 performances. Those productions were 17th century and 18th century versions of industrial light and magic, all achieved without CGI or green screens. Reading the few extant descriptions of these productions, one senses that they were both great fun and rather dangerous. Kids flew around courtyards on wires and pulleys, trapdoors flew open and outbelched fire and demons, and specialty fireworks were even imported from the Jesuit missions in China. The Jesuit experiment in marrying visual arts and performance to moral and civil education, though, crashed on the rocks when the Society of Jesus was suppressed by the papacy at the behest of European monarchs in the end of the 18th century. Down goes the ship. With the restoration of the society in the early 19th century, education came back, but it was a long, long way before the arts were able to return to a place of prominence. They never fully recaptured, at least until recent years, I would argue, the worldly delight and the ease with which the arts were used. Jared Manley Hopkins, the brilliant Jesuit poet, who never was allowed to publish a word in his lifetime, summed up the attitude of the 19th and early 20th centuries very well. He said, "Brilliancy does not suit us." So the question is, where does that leave us today in the second decade of the 20th century, of the 21st century, pardon me, at a moment of surprising reprisal of the arts, a moment when we find ourselves basking in the arts, but a moment that is also perilous in terms of the teaching of the arts and the promotion of the arts. In the past 50 years or so, the religious congregations and institutions were encouraged by the Second Vatican Council to recover their charisms in the light of the Second Vatican Council and in the light of their ancient traditions. And I would say that notable progress and recoveries have been made, especially here in the United States, but around also the global network of 200 plus colleges and universities that are affiliated with the Jesuits in one way or another around the world. The visual arts, theater, dance, and music now appear in the curricula of almost every Jesuit school at every level, from our grammar school here in Sacramento to the graduate programs at the Gregorian University in Rome and everything in between. Our universities are adorned with museums and galleries, and those become centers of instruction, of inspiration, of challenge for our students, our faculties, and our larger communities. One can't but think that Ignatius would be pleased that the schools continue to promote imagination and aspiration, even as arts programs continue to teach, to delight, to move. Studio arts, theater, dance, and music curricula grew significantly in the boom years of the second half of the 20th century. And in recent years, digital arts and cinema have entered the curricula as well. A few of our universities, following the venerable traditions and have commissioned daring and pace-setting buildings. One thinks, for example, of Stephen Hall's remarkable Chapel of St. Ignatius at Seattle University. Other institutions, with great difficulty and at considerable investment, have amassed significant collections. Our host, the Haggerty Museum at Marquette University, the St. Louis University Art Museum and its Museum of Contemporary Religious Art, Loyola's Luma and Martin Darcy collection provided cornerstones for this exhibit. Fairfield, Santa Clara, Boston College all have major collections and facilities. Given that most of our colleges were not founded by 19th century robber baron collectors, but were established to bring children and grandchildren of immigrants into the mainstream, it's not surprising that most of our universities lack major collections or endowments for traditional museums. A more modest option, that of providing gallery spaces for curated and visiting exhibits and run by a small but nimble staff, has provided livable and affordable compromises in many places. USF, Loyola Marymount, Holy Cross, Georgetown, Loyola Maryland, Rockhurst, and Seattle U, to name a few, are successful examples of this creative and entrepreneurial solution. Such venues provide their students an opportunity to encounter contemporary art and emerging artists. They provide spaces to exhibit student work, and sometimes enable their students indeed to learn the principles of museology in a hands-on context. Around the country and around the world, the arts today are certainly in a state of flux. Financial pressures on institutions and shifting employment marketplaces threaten much of the progress that has been made in the last half century or so. The trials of the recent pandemic have only exacerbated this situation. And honestly, Cicero's triad, to teach, to delight, and to move, sometimes seems hard to apply to much of the contemporary art scene, where ephemeral NFTs and conceptual programs are financially rewarded, and where self-expression tends to triumph communitarian dimensions. Still, much new art continues to be created that underscores our educational system's commitment to social justice and to humanistic progress. And many of our studio faculty promote art as a tool for dynamics to societal change. So here's my plea. My plea as a Jesuit art historian, as a practicing artist and a former gallery director. I encourage you, don't forget where we've come from. The rich tradition of the arts that has been a characteristic and even a definitive mark of our belief in and our commitment since our our inception in the 16th century, our belief in the transformative power of art. Don't allow the bean counters to weed the arts out of our curricula because they're not profit centers. Lobby, nag, control, demonstrate, remind administrators and faculty and parents and benefactors that the arts make us more humane, more complete, more beautiful, more like images and likenesses of the Creator. So I say today, in closing, congratulations to the curators and designers of this wonderful exhibition, whose imagination has brought together remarkable works that illustrate and resonate fully with our tradition and with its best aspirations. The themes collaboratively selected in the brief essays and notes by scholars and teachers from our schools develop these concepts in the light of the visual arts and form, if you will, a kind of litany against the pessimism and the negativity of much of our contemporary scene. Listen again to the words: justice, strength, courage, and devotion, solidarity, mercy, perseverance, and discernment, wisdom, honesty, acceptance, and sacrifice, compassion, and hope. Those are our foundational words. Those are godly words. Those are beautiful words. Those are human words. And the works that were chosen here to illustrate those continue to teach us, to delight us, and to move us. So the imaginative and holy and healing work of education through the arts continues. Our arts that glorify the Creator through the beauty of human ingenuity. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for your attention. And I will turn this back to Susan. Susan has been, I hope, collecting some questions.
Well, I don't know that we have many in the chat yet, but I do have, let's have a discussion. And I just want to begin by thanking you. That was an incredibly inspiring talk. And if you were here in the museum, we would be doing a round of applause right now. So I suspect people in our galleries who are watching this are doing that very thing right now. I was so moved by you talking about art as instrumental. It's not art for art's sake. And the fact that it is a vehicle for experience, for transcendence, for contemplation. And that is certainly, well, that's also what we know to be true about, if you look even in terms of how people experience museums and what is the nature of that aesthetic experience. There's such close alignment with what we know about how people transform in museums with what you're saying here. It's very moving to me. One thing that we've been working with at the Haggerty is the role of the visual arts in Ignatian pedagogy. So, which is something that's obviously very characteristic of Jesuit education and certainly important at Marquette and every other university. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, on the components of Ignatian pedagogy and where you see the visual arts playing a role in that.
Well, it's a little bit, for the 1,000 years that I taught Art History 101, I always talked about the hermeneutical circle. What's our experience of encountering a work of art? You look, you stop, you look, and you listen. You know, just like your mother said when you were a little kid. You stop, you look, and you listen. You stop, something makes you stop, and you go, Step one, inquiry. You say, I wonder. That leads you to deeper exploration. That deeper exploration brings you to another level of questioning. Well, why is that so? So a deepening of the experience and appropriation of the experience. It's why we study history. It's why we look to the roots of the universe and all of its many inhabitants. We return to that with a new perspective. It's never the same aha moment of encountering something that is so stunningly beautiful or so stunningly disarming. Doesn't always have to be beautiful to do this to us. But anything that causes us to stop, to reflect, to dig deeper, to ask myself, what is this saying to me about being a human being? Why are these feelings coming out of me? What knowledge have I acquired through this experience? How does that bring me back through this circle to my own humanity and to understand the humanity of others? So that would be the kind of circle of Ignatian pedagogy as I would apply it to. It's always reflection that is followed by study, is experience, study, deeper reflection, and then the question, how does this impact on my life? How does this make meaning out of my experience, or challenge what I consider to be what makes meaning out of my life? So I think it's to teach, and to delight, and to move people. To move people is the key to the whole thing.
And that human connection, and we know that again very much happens in museums, and that creates more capacity for empathy, which is so desperately needed in our culture. It always has been, but understanding the role that the arts and art museum experiences play in increasing empathy for other people, for other cultures.
It's why, I mean, why this last year has been so difficult, because part of the experience of art is being in a room and seeing someone break into tears when they're standing in front of a Rembrandt drawing, or being at the opera or at a musical, whatever, and having the shared experience of something that what does T.S. Eliot say? It's not the music heard, it's that you become the music while the music lasts.
That's right.
And that's what the unfiltered experience of art is about. And that's why museums are important things, gathering places where we can have a one-on-one experience, and even better, an experience with other people. As much as I hate the big blockbuster shows sometimes at big museums, there is something wonderful about seeing. I remember the last one of those that just pops into my mind. A few years ago, I was in New York, and there was a grand exhibit of Michelangelo drawings at the Met. And I got in there, somebody snuck me in early in the morning. So I had like a half an hour by myself. And then the place was swamped with people, and watching the people interact with the art is quite a remarkable experience. And it makes, when you see someone stopped by something, it makes you stop and say, I wonder why that's so important. So it's part of becoming more human.
Yeah. It's personal and it's collective. That's part of its power. So I think we have a question from your very appreciative group in the galleries downstairs from me. Could you give an example of an argument that has worked to articulate why, okay, this did not come from me, let me say this, to articulate why Bean County administrators should support the arts? Can you help us understand these are times of great pressure for universities everywhere. Tuition, I mean, you know where this is coming from.
Oh, yeah.
And so it feels like, I think sometimes like a soft thing to administrators when they're really looking at the bottom line. So how would you help people like me advocate?
Well, I would there are moments when studying history is a real cross. It's easier to live just in the moment, isn't it? And not to have to look back. It's more efficient. But if we don't look to the past, if we don't look to the experience of others, look deeply to the experience of others, and that's equally true of contemporary art as well. And that's why it's very important that our especially our smaller institutions, and they do it remarkably well in most places. They're bringing new artists into higher profile. They're letting us see the experience, and especially in so many of our university galleries, of people of color, of minority artists, of women, of underserved populations. The more we can ratify that experience of the art as being a transformative experience, the better it's going to be. How do you argue with an administrator? Well, you say, fine, you want to be known for making more technocrats than anybody else. That's a goal, but is that really what our kind of education should be about? Yes, we need to train people who can make a living, obviously. And that was a constant tension as I was starting the arts program at USF. It's why we had a lot of emphasis on graphic design and the like, and now on digital media, because that's where the jobs are. But informing those people who were involved with, teaching them how to draw. I had to fight with people to say, that's all well and good, but here's a piece of charcoal and here's a piece of paper. Let's start with that, and let's see how you can make your eye and your hand. I mean, mutatis mutandis, we do the same thing, with the mouse on the computer, but we move through the steps, and unless we have the exposure, then a big chunk of our humanity gets lost. And that's why I think it's so important that at least most of our institutions still have some sort of a requirement, or at least an enthusiastic support for the idea of students taking a basic art history course, a basic whatever, a basic crafts course, a basic art and materials course. So why? The answer is very simple, because it makes us more human, and the more human we are, the more we're going to get in touch with what's behind our humanity. And coming from my perspective, that's, you know, beings created in the image and likeness of a pretty good creator.
Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting to me. When I came here, I remember so clearly at the convocation, the orientation, when I first started working at Marquette 6 years ago, hearing someone say, when you are a student at Marquette, your education does not belong to you. You are getting this education to make the world a better place. And I was so moved by that. And it's so clear when we have this conversation about the art, the experience making you a deeper, better, more compassionate, empathetic,
sensitive human being.
Yeah, that's what it takes. It's interesting though. I think part of it is because art is not a big part of our culture in this country. If you grow up in Europe, it is. You grow up, you go to schools, you see it all around you, you don't question it. And here it's just, there's a distance and people don't trust their reactions to it. They don't know how to look at art. They feel like they need to know all the facts. They don't trust themselves to open up in the way that we're really talking about and getting inspired by it and participating in it. And in fact, one of the, it was once said to me that there's almost a concern that art is a luxury. You know, we always hear this metaphor that I don't think anyone in my role likes, which is you're the crown jewel, you're the hidden jewel, you know, it's this preciousness, you're expensive, it's not accessible. And so I think, to my mind, it's part of our cultural scenario as well, that the arts just aren't as, you know, they're not taught in school, they're not as much part of our life as they are in other cultures. So I think we deal with that as well.
I just looked down at the a question popped up here from Stefan. If use it or lose it is true, what impact on the senses would you believe that the space age will have on our senses, and can art provide a bromide to the disease of the loss of senses? I would point out one thing, that arguably the most powerful image of the 20th century is the photograph that Apollo 8 sent back to Earth on Christmas Eve of 68, that showed the great expanse of the moon, dead and gray, and off there in the distance, that blue pearl of Mother Earth. If there is a definitive reason why something beautiful needs to be before us at all times, you know, how many times have we seen that image? That image is the icon of the environmental movement, and some people even argue that without that image, it would have taken even longer for us to realize just how fragile the world is. An astronaut who wasn't a trained artist but had a really good Hasselblad camera in his hand, by the way, looks out the window and says, "Oh, oh, I better deal with this. And I got to take this home and show it to people." You know, what is the most wonderful short poem in the English language is Mary Oliver. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Well, that's what the arts are. It takes attention to look out the window, to take the time to look out the window, and to know that what you're seeing is something, or look through the window, look through the frame at the work, walk around the sculpture and see how the modeling, or walk through the building and feel, what does that building say to me? Does it make me feel at home and welcome? Does it make me feel oppressed? Again, without having reflective tools, that's harder and harder to do. And we can do a lot through this medium that we're on right now with a screen. I mean, we have access to more art, you know, in 4 clicks than humanity has ever had before. The problem is that half of the use of the internet is other kinds of pictures that probably are not that salutary, you know. So you know, we have all of this open in front of us, but nothing is, I don't think, is ever going to replace the unmediated experience of encountering a work of art. You know, listening to with earbuds is a good thing. Listening to someone sing and feeling the vibrations in your body, or going to, you know, as I did back in my balmy years, going to a Grateful Dead concert and feeling it go through your body, you know. it makes us who we are. And if we don't have that experience, and if we can't, at least try to share that with some folks, then we're much less richly endowed as human beings.
Well,
So
that
look
is
out the
absolutely-
window, look at the moon, look at the and look at back at the earth. That's even more important.
Mindfulness and perspective. Great gifts of the arts. Well, this has been inspiring. Thank you so much. Now I'm really sad you're not here because now I want to go out to dinner and talk about this for 2 hours. But
Indeed.
we will.
Another time, I promise you, I would love to do this.
Yeah, you have a standing invitation. And I thank you very much on behalf of the staff of the Haggerty Museum of Art, of the people who joined us this evening. You're doing such important work, and you've given me faith and motivation to continue. So
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
And again, once again, a word of congratulations to you folks from Loyola, from St. Louis and Marquette. This is a courageous work you did, and it has. I'm still chewing through some of the choices, and it's been a really wonderful experience for me to look at these and to see your interpretation of this kind of virtue litany, which I think I'm going to put up on my bathroom window. Put those 14 words up there. That would be helpful.
Love it. Yeah, me too. And so we'll close with another thank you to the curators of the exhibition, Lynn Schumo from the Haggerty Museum of Art, David Brinker, Museum of Contemporary Religious Art at St. Louis University. The exhibition's on view through December 19th. The museum is open every day and always free, so we would love to invite all of you to come by and see us and pick up one of the really wonderful catalogs published with this.
Great.
So with that, thank you. We'll have you have a good night. Stay safe. And we'll look forward to when we can visit in person.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.